All right, so welcome everybody again. My name is Maddie Gregory. I'm a career counselor over at the Colley Center, and I hold a joint appointment with the college, so the Georgetown College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. And so maybe we know this, maybe we don't, but you have your own career counselor specifically to support students, which is fantastic. And I partner with Tom all the time to do lots of different events and lots of different things, including this one, where we're hoping to kind of marry careers in the college and help students just understand more about particular careers that you can get with a liberal arts degree. So I'm going to turn it over here to Tom, where he can speak a little bit more just about this series of events that we're planning to have over the next couple of semesters. And then we'll jump right in and get started. So Tom, take it away.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Maddie. Welcome, everyone. It's great to have such a good group, a big group of students join us. And I want to say a quick welcome to our panelists and to thank them in advance for being here tonight. Shortly, they will introduce themselves. As Maddie mentioned, I'm Tom Trelonzio. I'm the Senior Associate Dean in the College Dean's Office and have been at Georgetown for a good 20 plus years and oversee the advising operation. But in addition to that, as Maddie mentioned, we collaborate very closely with the Colley Career Center. And this particular panel is really a brainstorming session of a couple of different people, including Maddie and myself, but some other folks, alumni, who want to help foster community and relationship building and mentorship building with students that are undergraduates in the college, with alumni of the college and or faculty of the college. And so with that, we have started to think through more clearly about developing these series, these career series, college and career series over the course of the year. And tonight is the first one in which we're going to focus our discussion on public affairs, the public sector, and law. And as we know, we have many students within the college who understand the framework of our liberal arts foundation, but want to use that to move forward into this particular career path. And so we have great panelists here tonight who are going to talk a little bit more about their own experiences. And we want this to be fun. We want this to be casual. We want it to be lively. And so we'll also allow time at the end for some questions from all of you. So I'll stop there because what's most important is we get to the conversations with our panelists. So Maddie, back to you. And I guess you'll introduce Beth real quick.
Yeah. So Beth Schill is going to be moderating our event today. She just waved. Beth is an advisor, a manager of all things public service careers, government careers, nonprofit careers, education careers, wearer of many hats. Beth does so many different things in our office. So we wanted to bring her in as well, just to be an additional resource to answer questions about career related things to these topics. And just kind of be our mediator here to kind of create the conversation and move things along. So Beth, welcome. And I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Maddie. And I'm excited to be here, everyone. I'm a proud anthropology major, so definitely in there on the liberal arts side. So happy to be here. And we have a fantastic panel of alums today. I think they've all done awesome things and are excited to talk to you all about their career opportunities. So I wanted to go ahead and turn it over to them to give a quick introduction, and then we'll go ahead and get started with some questions. So I'm just going to do it in order of who I see on Zoom. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind starting us off.
Thanks, Beth. Hi, everyone. I'm Paul Healy. I was class of 2015 in the college. I did a double major in classics and economics. I'm currently a consultant at McKinsey based here in Washington, D.C., where I primarily serve state and local governments on basically inclusive economic growth. So topics like infrastructure, transportation, access to broadband internet. And I spent the last 4 years actually in grad school doing an econ master's and then going to law school. And during that time, I had some work experiences, like during my summers and part-time jobs, more directly in the public sector, working for the Massachusetts Attorney General, working on economic policy for a few candidates running for office, including on the Biden-Harris campaign, on Andrew Yang's New York City mayoral campaign, and most recently for Danielle Allen, who's running for governor in Massachusetts. So try to speak to those experiences as well. But great to be here tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. All right, Professor Hartman, next.
Hi, yeah. So thanks for having me. Quick background, I see some students, so some folks know me from my teaching. I did a government degree at UVA all the way back in 1996, then did a law degree from U Chicago in 99 and spent a decade as a litigator. So I'm happy to talk about what that involves. I was at a pretty big firm in downtown Washington and spent a lot of time in federal court. So I can certainly talk to you about that. Obviously, I'm no longer there. I got the academic bug and ended up at Georgetown doing a doctorate in the government department, specifically in political theory, and started doing some teaching while I was a grad student and then was able to catch on as a professor. So I now teach constitutional law, First Amendment, free speech. From time to time, you might see me in an elements of political theory class or U.S. political systems class. So kind of run the gamut in the Department of Government. And I could certainly talk a little bit about that, academic route as well. So happy to be here and happy to field questions.
Wonderful, thank you. And Rashaan.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Rashawn Davis, class of 2014. I was a government major, so excited to be here tonight with you all. I'm the Associate Director of the Racial Justice Fund at change.org, which if folks don't know, Change is a tech platform where folks go and start petitions on things that they care about. And so we created a racial justice fund that to support a lot of the work that's happening around the country, and I direct that. But before that, my history is in local politics and government. I've worked in Newark, New Jersey for a long time, both as a candidate for public office and also I was a part of the Police Review Board here in Newark, which was one of the first civilian oversight boards in New Jersey.
All right, wonderful. And Devin.
What a stacked panel. Oh my goodness. Hi, everybody. My name is Deven Comen. I am on my 10th reunion year. I graduated in 2012. So this June, I will celebrate my 10-year reunion with my class. Crazy. I was also a government major. Tom can tell you about my wayward path to the college. Started at NHS, thought I was going to go to SFS. Figured out that I could basically do CULP in the college without having to do language requirements. And so I did government. And I'm currently serving in the Biden administration at the U.S. Department of Education. I'm a chief of staff over the Office of Communications and Outreach. And it is very crazy. So I am happy that I could be here with you all and want to also say that I'm doing this in my personal capacity. Not in any formal role with administration. And before this, spent 4 years at the College Board building the team that focused on making digital products for high school students. We focused particularly on first-gen low-income students and giving them better pathways through tools like a FAFSA chatbot to support them in filling that out. Prior to that, I was at Deloitte in the public sector practice during the Obama administration, served with a lot of different government agencies and really enjoyed my time there. I was happy to talk about consulting. And before that, did Teach for America here in DC at Anacostia High School. And I am a GSP alum, first gen myself, so getting to work at the federal level and supporting the agenda of equity and access across the country has been a great honor and a common thread throughout my career path. So pumped to be here. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for those introductions. It's always interesting to hear where people go. So kind of along those lines, we're getting close-ish to Thanksgiving. And I know a lot of our students are dreading the Thanksgiving dinner table and the question from the aunts or the uncles or the parents of, well, what are you going to do with a government major or a classics major or what have you? So I'm curious to understand a little bit more about if you could think back to when you're in college and why you chose the major you did. And did you have any clue that you were going to be doing what you are doing now when you chose that major? Or did you have like a different plan in mind?
I'm happy to chime in since I kind of started this already. so yeah, I think like a lot of first-gen students, I thought I was going to be a doctor. Came into the NHS. I was also very into international health and Model United Nations in high school. And so got really involved with clubs in that nature and was an international health major in the NHS. Quickly realized that I was not loving the pre-med requirements and was instead loving my work study job at the Berkeley Center and my Capitol Hill internship for Congresswoman DeLauro. And so was just finding I was going to all these talks like this and just kind of going to panels and realizing that I had caught Potomac fever, as we say here in DC, and did a complete 180. Initially thought I wanted to go into the SFS because I thought that the culture and politics major really spoke to my kind of wayward interests, and then learned about all of the econ requirements and language requirements and decided to actually go with the college. So I took a bunch of classes across many disciplines and ended up settling into government. Like I said, I was very internationally intrigued initially in my time at Georgetown and focused on South Asia. And I studied abroad in India, spent a lot of time working on kind of hunger and nutrition issues and girls' education with Shreen Joshi and others at Georgetown. And I came back from India my junior spring, started working as a volunteer in DC public schools, actually working on kind of global awareness, global citizenship kind of curriculum, and just was so, I think, floored that many of the issues that I felt were so central were right here in the US, in fact, very close to campus. And so then I took a bunch of domestic government and politics classes and was in the government honors program, was initially going to do a comparative thesis on school food access in India and the US, and then realized that the US was its own topic in itself. And so got very into school food politics and the Healthy Hunger Free Kids Act of 2010. Became very into that in my time in the government honors program, and decided to apply for Teach for America and was luckily placed in DC. And I always had education as something that was really important to me, that had made a huge difference in my life, and was involved in schools, but didn't necessarily think that I would end up in that path. So it is funny how things have now come really full circle a decade later, and I'm working at the US Department of Education in a government role as a political appointee, using a lot of skills that I gleaned from undergrad, but also throughout my experiences in the classroom, in the private sector, and now in the public sector. So what a ride. I could not have predicted it when I was sitting in your shoes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And yeah, the field of education right now, I'm sure you can attest, is all levels from preschool up through higher ed is in dire need of awesome individuals to come and be part of the system. So anyways, who would like to go next? What were you thinking when you selected your major, and are you now where you thought you were planning to be?
I can hop in here. Yeah, I think it's always interesting to think about these things in retrospect. I think for me, even before Georgetown, I knew that impact was something that was important to me, that I wanted to have an impact on my community. I wanted to have impact on the place that I lived. I was lucky enough in high school to be connected with Cory Booker, who was mayor of Newark at the time and was mentored by a lot of folks in his administration. And so I always knew I sort of wanted to make impact, but I didn't quite know how or what that looked like. And it wasn't until I came to Georgetown and started majoring in government. And I was also a justice and peace minor. And this was before, I think now justice and peace is a major, but back then justice and peace was only a minor. And so I think the combination of those two major and minor taught me sort of the nuances of impact, right? Like this is what impact can look like. I think oftentimes when you come in, you think, if I want to make change in my community, it looks one specific way. And I think the coursework that I did, the Ignatius seminar I had freshman year, all these things taught me that, change and impact is a broad spectrum and there's so many ways to make it. And so I didn't know what I was going to do after Georgetown. I thought about law school. I thought about grad school. I thought about a whole bunch of things. But I think what's funny about life is sometimes on your journey, your destiny sort of finds you. And I remember right around my junior year, I forget what course I was taking. It was a justice and peace course. And I felt so impacted by it. And I remember saying to myself, so many of the things that we're talking about here relate to the things that my hometown is struggling with in Newark. And so I remember going home to Newark during winter break, and gathering some friends at a pizza shop. And I said, we should run for public office. And everybody looked at me like I was crazy, like, no way, that's not going to work. And I said, well, basically what I learned, what I've been learning in school is like, if we enter the race, we show up to a few debates and make sure our opinions and have our thoughts heard, and then we drop out, we've done a good job. And so I came back to campus after that. And I remember I started telling some of my friends, my roommates, and they joined me on the idea. And so we opened up a campaign account with $300. We declared that I was going to run for city council in Newark. I probably single-handedly kept Bolt Bus in business. I would, after Fridays on my classes, I would take a Bolt Bus with some friends from Georgetown up to Newark, and we would knock on doors. And so a campaign that started with this idea that we would be around for just a few weeks, and with $300 in the account, 6 months later grew to a campaign that was bringing in $30,000, $40,000 in contributions. And it became one of the largest campaigns in the city, and we became competitive. And a lot of that has to do with not just the things that I was learning at Georgetown, right? But the people that I was meeting in my classes, the folks who, a lot of you are probably sitting in government classes, today and tomorrow. And it was in those classes that I sat next to people and I exchanged my ideas, and people were really intrigued by the idea of taking what we learned in the classroom and applying it in a real life sense. And so, by the end of the campaign in Newark, this was in 2014. I remember weeks before Election Day, during our Get Out the Vote rally, we chartered buses and had dozens of Georgetown students coming up. And so we ran an amazing campaign, and we lost. I think we came in fourth out of nine folks. But no one expected us to be there that long, be in the race that long, and no one expected us to do as well as we did. And so I say all that to say, sometimes your destiny sort of finds you. Sometimes what you're supposed to do is find you. And I would say, like, the best thing about my Georgetown experience and the best thing about majoring in government at Georgetown was really the people that I met, and my classmates and the folks who supported that vision and the trajectory of my life. So much of what I've accomplished and where I am now is a direct lineage of what happened in 2013 and 2014, the generosity and the expertise of so many people at the Hilltop.
Wonderful. Paul or Joe?
Yeah, I can go ahead. Sorry. So we have one answer. You can tell your relatives at Thanksgiving that you've decided to start a really inspirational city council campaign. That would be one good answer. I don't think I have a story that's as impressive as that, but so I basically decided to major in classics when I got to Georgetown because I had taken Latin in high school and just loved it. Really liked the act of translation and thinking through grammatical structures and relationships. And so I knew I wanted to major in classics, and then separately had been intrigued and interested in the field of economics, and took an intro level class my freshman year and just really fell in love with it as well. And so I enjoyed using my brain in those very different ways, and I had no idea that I would be interested. I actually had no intention of going to law school when I finished undergrad at Georgetown, and didn't really know that I would want to work in sort of public policy or government broadly. But those sort of using my brain in those ways was appealing to me. And so it's not surprising, I guess, to me that I'm doing what I'm doing now, and that I ended up pursuing the path I did. But I tried to use the time at Georgetown to just like I really, as you can probably tell, I really liked school. So I threw myself into that. I did research with different professors and just like enjoyed school for what it was, and then tried to use the summers to sort of like expose myself to different fields, and maybe kind of narrow things down to some extent. But then I just approached kind of post grad life with an open mind. So I actually went into consulting at McKinsey right after undergrad, and consulting is, can be a good industry for like trying kind of different types of organizations and different sectors. And so in my first year as a consultant, did some local government projects related to infrastructure, and just like really fell in love with the sort of very tangible, direct impact you could help create if you like help a public transit system run a little bit better, for instance. And so then that sort of set me on the path to wanting to learn more about public policy, and then to go to law school. And then I know we'll have separate panels about law school, but I went to law school and then had a realization that actually being a lawyer wouldn't be the best fit for me, but instead doing something that was a little bit more generalist and like kind of synthesizing and using numbers on a daily basis, which I enjoy doing as well. And so that's sort of how I ended up here doing what I'm doing. Could not have predicted like this specific path when I was an undergrad, but I think the types of things that I responded well to and enjoyed doing, it's not surprising that I am where I am.
All right, and Joe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously my situation is a little different in that I did undergrad elsewhere and law school elsewhere. I can talk about undergrad, or if you may talk about Georgetown, how I ended up there, I can go either direction.
I mean, what were you thinking when you were an undergrad, though? I mean, from the poli side, it's similar.
Yeah. So, I mean, quite honestly, and maybe some, I listened to the stories and what you guys did in your undergrad, and I think, wow, you're way ahead of me. I was a government major. I was interested. I grew up local. I'm actually one of the few. I grew up in Fairfax County. So it's in the water here that you're interested in politics, you're interested in government. So, I started doing a government major, and, immediately was thinking somewhat pragmatically, well, what am I going to do after I finish? Am I going to go and, think, am I going to work on the Hill? Am I going to get into politics? And, law school was kind of an option that probably emerged for me my junior year. And, it just seemed like a good follow on, and I liked writing and I liked sort of the analytical piece, and thought that would be something which is true, by the way, you do develop that quite a bit in law school, as I'm sure Paul can attest to. And then, of course, did law school. I talked to a lot of students at Georgetown about that whole process because it's involved, as you guys know. And, did the big law firm thing for a while, to kind of speed it up and not dwell too long. I liked the practice of law. I wasn't sure I wanted to do it for the next 30 years. And I really got drawn into Georgetown through lecture series here while I was a lawyer. I would come over for these, academic lectures, and sort of got sucked in that way. And one of the professors, who's no longer here, but had said, "Hey, have you ever thought about grad school?" I thought, well, no, maybe I should. And ended up getting the academic bug. So, in terms of predicting, I mean, if you told me as a college junior that I'd be teaching constitutional law at Georgetown, I mean, you could have knocked me over with a feather. That's just not what I thought. And, maybe that goes to show, life can go in different ways. And government degree and that government background, even though it was a long time ago, did end up helping me, I think, all the way down the road now. So, it's very atypical. It's a very atypical route. Most people don't do that. So
awesome. So I'm going to kind of turn it back on the work you all are doing now. And I was curious if you could describe a little bit about the nature of your work, and what are some skills, and a few of them have touched on this, but like, what are some specific skills that you picked up that you're using now that surprise you?
I mean, one global thing that I always tell GSP mentees and undergrads is just read as much as you can. The luxury to be able to just read and have it be like your primary job. Maybe you have a work study job too, but it is so great to have the reading really prescribed to you in a formula from someone, a scholar who's like thought about it super intentionally. So I think learning how to read things well for main idea and kind kind of figuring out for me what always got me excited, even about the classes that maybe I was less drawn to initially, like some of the political theory classes, for example, was figuring out how it connected to something that I related to or saw in the media. And so applicability was something that, I am constantly making connections in my work, from my work as an educator and having to think about the best ways to deliver content to ninth graders and keep them engaged, to the stakeholder management that comes when you're a consultant and your clients are folks in the federal government and you have to figure out how to speak their language, walk their walk, and support them in achieving their goals, which requires a ton of listening. So I did a lot of interviews for my government honors thesis with folks in the political world, including former and current Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. He's back again. And so I think like having those experiences to work with high level, what we call principals, and get that exposure early through my professors, through my job at the Berkeley Center, was really great for helping me learn some of the soft skills of stakeholder management, in addition to all of the kind of research writing things that you get from a comprehensive liberal arts education like Georgetown. And I definitely use those skills as I navigate relationships in and around the department. I'm a chief of staff. So, and I was also chief of staff at College Board. And so, you're supporting your boss and very much a number two as a chief of staff. And you have a lot of positional power, even if you don't have actual power. And so figuring out how to use strategic communication and understand kind of the shadow governance of how decisions are actually made at a particular institution. All those things are things that I started to pick up from readings, from internships, working in and around government. And then I've now been able to use those things in my work. Last point I'll make is just, this was touched on by Rashaan, just relationships with my classmates, but also with professors and mentors. So many people helped me on this recent transition to try and work in the Biden administration. I was not on the campaign. I wasn't really connected, wasn't the kid of a big donor, right? And so figuring out how to get on the radar of both the White House Presidential Personnel Office, as well as they're called agency review teams, basically teams of volunteers that sign up to help a government transition from one presidential administration to another. They start thinking about secretaries, they start thinking about assistant secretaries, and being on the radar of both those groups is a networking frenzy. And so folks like Georgetown's Scott Fleming, who's no longer here, but was Georgetown's lobbyist and very involved with student life, opened doors for me. I was maybe 1 or 2 degrees LinkedIn separated from a lot of people, and Ahoya was maybe that connection point for me. And all of those conversations added up to, eventually landing an interview. And then from there, it was me, but it's getting in the door. And so all those relationships that you're making now with your peers, with your professors, with the people that manage you in internships, really can bear fruit even a decade later or 13 years later that you wouldn't necessarily anticipate.
Awesome. And I think, Rashaan, you were touching a little bit on that in your introduction too, the networking piece. So
yeah, I would say absolutely. I know it gets said a lot, but it is so true that your network is one of the most powerful assets you have, and not just in an opportunistic way, but really having folks who see the world similar to you and also see the world differently from you. And being able to use that to sort of push yourself forward. And so a lot of those experiences have real practical applications to my own life. I think I mentioned I was on the police review board in Newark for 2 years. And anyone who's sort of been watching any news around this country for the past 2 years and really for the past 200 years, you understand that there's a lot of challenges that we face around public safety and around policing. And a police review board, something that many cities across the country are trying to get established, is hard work. And being on that board and, being in those rooms and having those hard conversations, a lot of it actually reminded me of some classes I took at Georgetown, where you're going to be in classrooms with people who see the world differently from you or have different opinions than you. And that very much had practical applications with what I was doing with the board. And even at change.org with our racial justice fund, which is our $6 million initiative to support Black-led organizations across the country. A lot of that too is just relationship building. At the end of the day, no matter the amount of money or, the fact that it's a tech company, at the end of the day, so much of what you're going to do in life is around relationships. And so sort of the more practice you have with that, just the better off you'll be, I'll say. So, yeah.
And Paul, it looked like you were going to jump in at one point and talk about the skills piece that is a bit unexpected for you.
So I'll just say briefly, I think the most important, this sort of like the most unexpected but important skill from Georgetown was sort of like, and this isn't just limited to academics. I think it can be present in extracurriculars as well, but like the experience of taking ownership and like creating something new and original. So I think for me, that was mostly through writing a thesis in econ. But friends of mine who like started new student groups that grew a lot while they were in college, I think honed sort of the same skills. And it's like, it's very different from like a lot of your experience at college is like doing a problem set where there's like a neat problem with an answer that's like designed for you to find it. Same thing with like taking tests, and like those are important things. But like most of the stuff you do in the real world is a lot more dependent on like dealing with ambiguous situations and like solving problems that no one has solved before, which is hopefully like why you are going to be asked or hired to solve them. And so like starting a new thing, writing a thesis where there's no neat answer to be found, and just like having to put in the work and like structure your thinking along the way is really valuable, and like was a relatively small part of my experience because it was like one class for 1 year of school, but it's something I have drawn on, disproportionately.
Yeah. And Joe, how about you? I mean, going into law for a decade and then making the pivot to academia, is what skills are you learning now that you think were kind of founded in your undergraduate years that surprise you, that you didn't think you would learn, or you didn't think you would use? Pardon me.
Boy, I mean, the big one as a lawyer, and someone else touched on it. The big thing I think you learn as a law student is how to be relentlessly, almost to a fault, analytical. To just tear problems into these tiny little pieces, frame them a particular way and then build it back up and write, essentially. They call it thinking like a lawyer. It's what the first year curriculum's about. They really, I mean, I could talk a lot more about it, but definitely the thing I got most from the law training. And then I think Paul's right. Once you get into, quote, the real world, suddenly it's about more than just a neat solution to a problem. You're managing a lot. You might be managing, well, there's a legal answer, but there's a business answer, and then there's a client answer. And oh, by the way, there's some other context that maybe be political or economic, whatever. I mean, you're playing with these you're playing chess, put it that way. And so, that part of law practice I really enjoyed. So for those of you who are sort of, curious about law practice, that's something you do have the opportunity to do. Like I said, I was a litigator. I was essentially, preparing and very occasionally trying cases. The thing that struck me since I've been at Georgetown, and it's probably sort of obvious if you think about it, is I spend so much time up in front of people talking and conveying information. It's sort of ironic that I was a trial lawyer. I spend far more time talking in front of people now than I ever did as a lawyer. So that's probably my, if you want to call it a skill, I don't know, but that has surprised me. Expect the other parts, the analysis, the writing, being very careful with facts. But I think, the communicating on one's feet, it might surprise people to learn. Actually, as a litigator, even you do less of that than you might think, unless you're one of those rare people who manages to get to trial quite a bit. So.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm trying to be mindful of time, and there's so many questions that I know I could ask you all. But I wanted to give a chance for some of our students to ask questions. So students, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please go ahead and either raise your hand or you can submit it in the chat function, and we'll do our best to try and go in some semblance of order. So yeah.
Thank you guys for being here. And I just wanted to ask, because I know a lot of you mentioned these great internships and all these great experiences you had on Capitol Hill or with professors. I was just wondering, how do we tap into those resources? How do we secure those internships, find those relationships, and kind of navigate that world?
I found my time at the Career Center to actually be really valuable, and Beth, you can pay me after. I think one of the most helpful things that I did were mock interviews, where I think the technology has gotten even more advanced now, but basically it was a video of you answering interview questions, and then you could watch it afterwards with a career coach. And I found it extremely useful, particularly when I was going through kind of regimented consulting interview processes. So I think Career Center is great. I really found most of for example, my undergrad job, which was a research job at the Berkeley Center for all 4 years, found my freshman fall from one of my foci leaders who was a senior. He was graduating, he was leaving, and he basically gave me his seat. That was awesome. And a lot of things were just sort of navigating. I think, for summer internships, my sophomore summer, I think I applied to 12 different jobs. I was actually rejected for this summer program through the federal government. And then my resume got picked up by a different hiring manager. So I went from having a really structured program that was also unpaid to a legit paid job working at the Treasury Department in a really cool office, because the person who was looking through USA Jobs saw my resume and pulled it out. So I think some of it is just kind of luck and really casting a wide net. And I think, talking to people, particularly if you have mentors who are maybe upperclassmen, or even just chatting with professors about what internships they found to be most formative. And I think sometimes you can find the clubs or groups that you're in might open up other career opportunities. And I know, having worked in DC public schools, was really what ignited my interest in, going into the classroom. And I did that through, not necessarily through teaching opportunities, through service opportunities with the CSJ. So.
All right, students, any other questions?
Hi, I have a question for Devin, but also maybe to be answered more broadly. I found your experience of entering Georgetown in the NHS to then changing your major really compelling. And also what I wondered was, you've had this really rich experience of exploring education. Is that something that you knew as a Georgetown student, like, I'm pursuing this area deeply, this is sort of a niche I've found? Or is it something that's more reflective, that you can think back and say, this really did shape my Georgetown experience in an impactful way?
Yeah, it's funny that you found that to be interesting, because all I remember is crying in Missy Foy's office, GSP, a lot about not being a doctor and not knowing what I was going to do. But in retrospect, right, like Rashaan said. So yeah, I think I was always kind of interested in education. I had a great teacher in high school that I definitely credit with encouraging me to go to a school like Georgetown. And that ultimately changed my life, of course. But I had other academic interests, and like I said, international affairs was really my main focus. So it was some working in DC public schools, but also just becoming interested in issues of higher education and college affordability, and seeing how that played out on a campus like Georgetown, which honestly looked a lot different than when you guys are there now, just in terms of the campus climate and people being very open about perhaps having Pell Grants or being first generation. And I mean, we just wanted to hide, I feel like, when I was an undergrad, and the way that the campus has really opened up that conversation is super exciting to me. I would say like the whole Jesuit education and the pieces that come through being in the college and having the opportunity to take electives were kind of what snuck up on me in getting excited about education more generally, and helped me do a lot of self-reflection. I guess senior fall, I took this, or no, junior, maybe senior fall, I don't know. I took this class called Jesuit Education that was actually in the theology department. And it was all about the purpose of being in college, and like, what did the Jesuits think about the value of an education? And, it's really about seeking the magis, the more, and like, challenging yourself, but also thinking about how you can walk in solidarity with those on the margins. And there was something about doing those readings, talking about them in community with other peers as we were, I think maybe feeling pressure from different aspects of our lives to like go join a certain employer, or feel like as a first gen student, you have to make a bunch of money and support your family. And so that class really helped me kind of go inward and clarify some of my values. And I just kind of took a leap. I also won't pretend like, doing Teach for America was still something that I knew could springboard into other things if I decided I like maybe did want to be in the classroom. So I think that's the other thing is, I would just say is your first job is not your last job. And whatever it is, you will learn from it, you will take from it, clarify for yourself, is this a good fit? Is this an environment that I want to be on? And ultimately, most people do move on from their first job, their first employer. And so you put so much pressure on yourself to like pick that one thing. And I think what is so true in all these stories is that it's such a journey, and you can't predict your path. And so it's just, doing that self-reflection, checking in every step of the way, talking to people you trust, and deciding for yourself, is this the right move?
Anybody else want to jump in? Was there a formative moment when you were in Georgetown that really inspired you moving forward?
I mean, one thing I'll say, and Devin mentioned this, but Georgetown is just so rich with so many different programs and opportunities, and I think sometimes it's easy to take that for granted. But I was also a first generation student, and GSP was such a fundamental piece of my Georgetown experience, from just getting the right resources on campus to figuring out kind of what the process was for different things. And there are so many different types of GSP like programs, whether that's foci or sort of whatever community you belong to. I think there are just so many resources there, and don't think that you have to figure it all out on your own, because no one ever does, right? It's always about the community. And so there's so many different communities on Georgetown, so many different resources, so many people willing to help. And so, like Devin said, definitely tap into that and take advantage of that.
All right, so we got time for maybe one more student question. If anybody is out there, they have a burning question.
Sure, I do have a question. I'm not quite sure it's burning, but I am wondering if there is anything that you can think about, when you were between the ages of 18 to 22, right where we are, that you wish you would have done, or if you have any sort of thoughts looking back on things that you maybe wish you would have explored further, or opportunities, that are right here, since we do have a little bit more time to take care of that.
I'll take a crack at that. being a lot farther removed maybe than the rest of the panelists, and I'll just speak to this from the perspective of going to professional graduate school. I tell students interested in law school who are dying, I want to go right into law school. I went straight through, and I was young. I graduated college at 20 and I started law school. I'd barely turned 21 and I did fine. I did fine, but I would have really benefited from 2 years at Teach for America, or going and getting just a job in the private sector and kind of getting my head around how the world works. And you don't learn everything in a year or two, but there's a lot to be said for getting your sea legs in life and kind of getting a little bit better sense of how things work outside of school, because you've all been in school your whole life. That's what you've done. Well, maybe other than last year in front of your computer, but you've been in school. And that's the thing I would have done differently. I would have taken a year or two and, either done something, professionally that would have moved me closer to law, like paralegal or something like that, or taken a flyer on something that I might not ever get the chance to do again. Because, we've heard several people like Rashawn's talking about, yeah, I ran for office. That's what I decided. I mean, that kind of thing. And look what that's done. So take time to do something like that before you lock yourself in, at least in the professional side of things. That would be my thought.
Grad school is expensive.
Yeah. I think I have a pretty similar a similar reflection to what Joseph shared, but basically I think so. I love, as I mentioned at the beginning, I loved the sort of balanced liberal arts education that I had in the college, and I think I could have maintained many of the benefits of that and still taken some chances to go deeper on specific issues or topics that were interesting to me. And I think when I was in college, I had maybe too much of a mindset of wanting to be a generalist and try everything a little bit, because I think I had an idea that would in some sense preserve my optionality and keep doors open. But I think what you might find as you move through the world is sometimes going really deep on one issue or one field or subfield helps you understand how to do that for others later on. So you get really deep on one policy issue, whether it's education reform or policing, and then if it so happens that later on you get interested in another issue, you'll understand how to break down a field and figure out who the important people are. And so I think this notion of optionality was kind of why it was at least kind of salient to me when I was an undergrad. And I wish, and that could come in the form of like Joseph was mentioning, using whether it's a summer or a school break to commit to some sort of nascent startup organization, whether it's actually a startup or a political campaign or something where you're throwing yourself into something, or study abroad in a country that's very unfamiliar to you and they speak a different language and you'll have to learn all about that rather than studying abroad in a very comfortable sort of place. So things like that.
I don't really have any regrets. I don't know. I feel something that was a good practice that I probably didn't start until my maybe sophomore year. There's so many events like this and just lectures and things at the Motora Center. And I would always go to stuff when there was free food and interesting people. And I made this little promise to myself, okay, Devin, you're here. It's a time-bound thing. It's a privilege and honor to be here. So I'm going to go to 2 external things a week. So I would go to a lecture or a talk or wait in line to see some dignitary, and just really try to soak that in. And it did mean that sometimes I would maybe miss out on a social thing, or I was basically never hanging out in my room. I was either in Lao or in Leo's or at something. So yeah, I was very much in my college experience. And I think that was great. I think my freshman year, I was maybe a little bit less sure of myself and that I belonged on campus. And so kind of maybe was a little bit more reserved in going to things and I don't know if I belong in these spaces. And my sophomore year, I was I'm going to go, see the Secretary of State and, I can get a ticket to this. So I think learning early on that you belong at Georgetown. You got in on your own merits, and you deserve all of the opportunities that are afforded to you from being there. And so don't wait to embrace them, and reach out. There's so many great offices and professors that can support your journey, whether it's like a personal thing you're going through or these big questions of what you want to be post-college. So enjoy it.
Yeah, and I sort of echo everything that's been said, particularly what you said, Paul. Challenge yourself to be uncomfortable, and that will serve you so much. And there are ways to do that, and you can do that in small ways, and you can do that in big ways. But I think it's good exercise to get used to being uncomfortable. And Georgetown is such a great place to do that because there is a safety net. Like, the worst thing that could happen is someone tells you no, right? And so on campus, at least for me, that looked like going to events that clubs had, that clubs that I would never think of joining or being a part of, but going to those events and learning things. And, sometimes that meant cold emailing professors that I didn't know, whose courses I never took, but maybe I was interested in their work. And so, I would sort of echo what Paul said about, just sort of get used to being uncomfortable. And that's sort of a good muscle to exercise.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all tonight for your insight and your wisdom and sharing with everybody your career experiences. As Maddie had said, this is the first of a number of events that we're going to do. So on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Maddie and Tom to close us out for the evening.
Thank you all again. Thank you to our panelists. Students, if you have any additional questions that are coming up or that maybe pop up in the middle of the night tonight, you all got an email from me today. Feel free to shoot them to me and I can push them out to the appropriate parties as we go. So if you need to reply to that email, please feel free to do so. You can reach out to me, you can reach out to Tom. But thank you all again for being here. And thank you so much to our panelists. Tom, I want to give you space to speak as well here.
Yeah, no, I'll just wrap it up very quickly. In gratitude, I'm very, very thankful for our panelists and spending time with us tonight. The advice, your perspective, how you've approached your time at Georgetown and now post-Georgetown, I think has been very meaningful and impactful to hear and to learn. And what I could glean from all of you is that you've given good, solid advice to our students who are beginning to navigate their trajectory at Georgetown and how to make their experience the most, impactful experience. The one thing I would just say quickly, and something that Devin said, I think she used the word reflection. I believe wholeheartedly in having students reflect and discern. And that is something that I don't think we do enough. And we're at a very, very charged place at Georgetown, moving from A to B to C very quickly. Reflection and discernment as part of our Jesuit values is really important. And it's important to take a step back and ask yourself why you're doing the things you're doing. And I think that helps then you think through more clearly about the things that are important to you. So I would just echo what Devin was sharing there a little bit more about the discernment and reflection piece. But I'll stop there. I just, again, want to say thank you. Thank you to Beth and Maddie. And we're really pleased to offer these, and we'll offer several more in the spring semester. And I hope everyone has a great evening.